Welcome, everybody, to the Legends of March Madness on the Grizzly Truth Sports Network. I'm your host for the Legend of March Madness, Mike Goodpaster. And what are the Legends of March Madness? We're going to look back at some special teams that did some special things, made Final Four runs, maybe won a national championship. Maybe they just pulled one special upset. But for that one shining moment, whether it was one game or 6 games, that team was special. Today we're going to talk about the 1985-86 LSU Tiger basketball team. Now, they were a number 11 seed in the NCAA tournament. They beat the 1, 2, and 3 seeds in the region in the same tournament in 1986 to make it to the Final Four. The thing that makes this story special is what this team overcame to make that Final Four run. The team is also remembered for overcoming numerous obstacles. Some of them weren't even basketball related. Star forward Jerry Reynolds had left LSU early for the NBA draft. Reynolds was the star on the 1984 and 85 LSU teams, and the Tigers originally had 2 7-footers and a third player near that height on their roster, but only one was available for the start of the season. 6'11" Damon Vance was declared academically ineligible. 7'1" freshman and future NBA player Tito Horford either left the team or was dismissed, depending on the source. The other 7-footer, Zoran Jovanovic, suffered a season-ending knee injury during the team's Christmas break. 2 other players were declared academically ineligible. Dennis Brown, reportedly a solid engineering student, took too few courses at his major and was ruled out for the entire season. Star forward Nikita Wilson failed 2 courses in the fall semester, ruling him out for the spring semester. As a result of the 3 losses, Ricky Blanton switched positions from guard to center, and team captain Don Redden said at the time the Tigers had gone from an NBA-sized team to a big junior high team. The team was then hit with a chickenpox outbreak, with star forward John Williams and backup forward Bernard Woodside hospitalized for a week and a team quarantined for several days. LSU was forced to reschedule what intended to be a nationally televised game against Auburn due to a lack of healthy players. And Coach Dale Brown even went so far as to bring football player Chris Carrier in as emergency cover. But amazingly enough, when you look at this team and their start to the season, they started off 14-0. They were ranked 8th in the country. Now that 14-0 wins over Montana State at Washington. Washington was a decent program back then. BYU, Hawaii, Hawaii Pacific, Hawaii Loa, Hawaii Hilo. Now the great thing about that is they get to spend like 5 days in Hawaii. They beat Hardin-Simmons. They beat Lamar. They did have a win at Texas. They beat Southeast Louisiana, Southern, Oral Roberts, Georgia, Mississippi State. Then things took a turn for the worse. In the SEC, after the Georgia-Mississippi State wins, they lost to Alabama, they lost at Tennessee, they won a couple games, then they lose 4 in a row, including a loss to Kentucky 54-52, Georgetown 74-72. They finished the regular season out, losing at Kentucky 68-57. In the SEC tournament, they started off with a win over Florida, and then they were beaten by Kentucky in the semifinals 61-58. So, they're an 11 seed. Nobody thinks they can do anything. The thing about the NCAA tournament back then was sometimes you get lucky and play in your home court. And LSU got to play in Louisiana at the Assembly Center, and they started off against the Purdue Boilermakers out of the Big Ten. Now, LSU snapped a 2-game NCAA tournament losing streak because in 1984, they lost to Roosevelt Chapman in Dayton, which that team will be a subject later on in this series. And then the next year, they lost in the first round also. But they started this off in front of a packed house, 13,749 at the Maravich Assembly Center, and they beat Purdue in a double overtime thriller, 94-87. The Boilermakers were able to shut down all-SEC player John Williams for most of the night, holding the Tigers' leading score to just 16 points. However, covering Williams proved a heavy burden for Purdue as LSU's other 4 starters each produced double-digit scoring performances. LSU shooting guard Anthony Wilson played a career game best, scored 25 points, And after Purdue whittled an 11-point Tiger lead down to 2 in the waning moments of the contest, the Boilermakers were forced to foul with 16 seconds left. Wilson went to the line in each of LSU's final 4 possessions in overtime. He sunk 7 out of 8 free throws, giving the Tigers the final margin of victory. Now, with LSU led this game at halftime 39-35, and in the second half was a seesaw battle. The contest was actually tied 15 times during the fourth quarter, and Purdue forward Todd Mitchell refused to let the Tigers get away. Mitchell scored a game-high 31 points, including shooting 11 of 13 from the field, 9 of 12 from the stripe. Doug Lee and Troy Lewis each put up 20 for the Boilermakers as well. Now, LSU missed out on a couple opportunities to finish the game at the end of regulation. Center Ricky Blanton and Wilson both missed potential game winners in the closing minutes. And after a slow-paced first overtime that saw each team only score 4 points, John Williams finally broke loose for the Tigers in the second overtime. Williams fed 2 assists to Wilson on consecutive possessions, scored a basket, tallied a steal, and pulled down 2 rebounds during a 3-minute span to help the Tigers gain an 11-point advantage. It was after Williams fouled out with 43 seconds left that the Tigers' lead fell back down to 2. And that's when Wilson clinched the win with clutch free throw shooting as he had all night. The raucous sellout crowd may have also been a deciding factor down the stretch, which is something that worried Purdue all week. And Dale Brown, the LSU coach, even after the game, said it was a great victory, and I want to personally thank our fans. We couldn't have done it without them. Now, with the win, LSU 23-11 on the season will now move on to face Memphis State, who was in the Final Four last year. They lost to Villanova 52-44. And yes, I still live in the 80s. Last year, this is 86. That meant 1985. And the LSU-Memphis State game would also be played at the Maravich Assembly Center, and one of the great buzzer beaters in NCAA tournament history. LSU guard Anthony Wilson said it was a feeling he never felt before, but it was a moment he dreamed of as a young boy in Louisiana to make a game-winning shot. Head coach Dale Brown hoped that moment would be answered as he and the rest of the 13,784 at the sold-out Assembly Center held their breaths after a mad scramble for the ball with the score tied at 81. Wilson got the chance when he gathered the loose ball, fired up a soft 8-foot jumper. 1 second later, with the horn sounding, the junior's final heave kissed off the glass, bounced twice on the rim, and dropped gently through the net, sending the 11th-seeded LSU Tigers to the Sweet 16 with a thrilling 83-81 upset of the 3rd-seed Memphis State Tigers. Now, Wilson's buzzer beater capped an improbable LSU comeback that enabled the Tigers to reach the round of 16 for just the 5th time in program history. LSU, which of course, as we just talked about, beat Purdue in double overtime, they improved to 24-11 to advance to the NCAA Southeast Regional Semifinal in Atlanta at the Omni. Now, senior forward Don Redden, playing in his final home contest, paced the Tigers with a game-high 23 points and began a sequence in which Wilson would miraculously end up with the ball. With the score tied at 77, Redden missed a jumper with 5 seconds left that caromed off the rim and fell to the floor. There was a mad dash for the rebound as Redden, Wilson, and Blanton tried to get a handle on the ball. Wilson was able to come up with it and get off the winning shot that hung on the rim for what seemed like an eternity. Pandemonium broke out in a sold-out crowd as Wilson's teammates rushed to the floor to mob him at midcourt. Still in jubilation, Wilson emerged from the pile of players to see Brown, who was there to hug the unlikely hero. LSU's John Williams had overcome a virus earlier in the week to post a game-high 13 rebounds to go along with 19 points. Blanton, as Blanton would do, turned in a gutsy performance on defense, stymieing MSU star center William Bedford. He held him to 2 second-half points, 15 for the game. Blanton himself finished with 11 points and 11 rebounds and seemed to be there whenever the Tigers needed a key play. Now, the Tigers actually pushed a 6-point halftime lead to 10 with the first 2 baskets of the second half. The Tigers trailed 60-52 with 15:32 remaining in the game. but went on a 9-1 run to cut the deficit to just 6, culminating with a pair of Williams free throws at the 11:41 mark. Blanton converted a three-point play during the stretch and frustrated Bedford, who fought through foul trouble in the second half. "I was putting the body on him," Blanton later said. "I didn't want to lose to him because if I did, they could easily throw an alley-oop to him, and they looked for that all game long." Blanton, only 6'6" and playing the center position, embraced the role in the game as he did all season, contributing in ways where his aggressive play would be needed, and his teammates knew it and appreciated it. Bedford returned with 4 fouls at the 6:36 mark, with the Tigers clinging to a 73-71 lead after Blanton converted 2 free throws. After a basket from maybe the greatest name in college basketball history, Baskerville Holmes, who led Memphis State with 20 points, Bedford received the ball in the next trip and turned it over. 30 seconds later, the lead was gone after John Williams converted on consecutive trips down the floor with a turnaround jumper and a layup. LSU got over the hump and took its first lead since the 11:07 mark in the first half when Redden drilled a 15-foot jumper from the left wing after a Blanton steal. The teams traded baskets as the clock dwindled down to 1 minute. Memphis State was able to tie it at 81 on a Bedford bank shot with 30 seconds left, which set the stage for the hectic conclusion that followed. Bedford and Memphis State coach Dana Kirk were in stunned disbelief following the prayer that was answered in the waning seconds. After all, these Tigers from Tennessee were built for another run at the Final Four. They were actually stronger, had more size, and 3 of the premier players in the nation, in Holmes, Vincent Askew, and Andre Turner. A little side note, all 3 played in the NBA. And Dale Brown after the game said they had every ingredient to have been national champions. "I told the team if they win, they'll probably be the 1986 national champions. They were easily the best team we'd played all year." So now there's 16 teams left. And there's a chance here for LSU to do something really special. And that next game is against the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets. And Coach Brown could feel the momentum swinging in the direction of his opponent early on in the game, and he knew he had to stop the bleeding fast. LSU's head coach of 14 seasons stood up from his courtside seat and called a timeout with a little over 6 minutes remaining. Now, all game, LSU had been kind of teetering on being out of this game. The game would get to 4-6 points, and then they would kind of reel it back. And Georgia Tech's Craig Neal sent much of the Omni into a frenzy after a steal from LSU point guard Derek Taylor and a driving layup to give the number 2 seeded Yellow Jackets a 56-52 lead. Now, they're playing in Atlanta. So now LSU has the shoe on the other foot. They're basically the visitors. Georgia Tech's the home team. Now, in the timeout, Brown shouted instructions to his players before sending them back onto the field or floor, primed for a run late in the second half. And it was Taylor who responded with 2 quick baskets following the timeout. The LSU senior hit a spinning shot 8 feet away, followed by a 14-foot jumper in the lane after a Georgia Tech turnover to tie the score at the 5:07 mark. After the teams traded baskets, senior forward Don Redden put the Tigers up for good by nailing a 21-foot jumper from the baseline with 3:28 remaining to give LSU a 60-58 lead. With All-American sophomore John Williams held to just 5 points on 2 of 15 shooting, the duo knew they had to carry the 11th-seeded Tigers down the stretch if they wanted to make a miraculous run to the Final Four. Redden led the game with a game-high 27 points on 10 of 16 shooting, while Taylor played all 40 minutes and was 9 of 18 from the floor for 23 points in the 70-64 LSU victory. Now, LSU is set up for a 4th shot at the Kentucky Wildcats. And the Wildcats had squeaked by them twice, blown them out pretty handily at Rupp Arena earlier in the season, but nobody really gave this team much of a chance. I mean, LSU had lost 11 of its last 15 meetings with Kentucky, including 3 already in the 85-86 season. The Wildcats had won 14 straight overall and 21 in a row over Southeastern Conference opponents. So when the Tigers faced Kentucky in the Elite Eight, March 26, 1986, at the Omni in Atlanta, the odds weren't exactly in their favor. And when Kentucky jumped out to an 11-4 advantage in front of a raucous crowd of just over 16,000 less than 4 minutes into the game, the outcome looked bleak and predetermined for the Tigers. But this team was being called a team of destiny. An 11th-seeded LSU had lost 8 of its last 13 regular season games, yet it had already managed upsets over the number 6, 3, and 2 seeds in the NCAA Tournament's Southeast region. A number 11 seed had never made the Final Four, so it was only fitting the Tigers' team of destiny got a chance against 1-seeded Kentucky. Now, as Don Redden said after the game, if the pressure's on anybody, it's Kentucky. And they showed it. Now, Redden, fresh off a 27-point performance in that Sweet 16 win against Georgia Tech, said they're the number 1 seed. They're supposed to get to the Final Four. We're Cinderella. The Tigers slowly chipped into that 11-4 deficit, eventually knotting the score at 14, and they soon took their first lead of the game, 17-16, on a John Williams free throw with 11:51 to play in the half. The two teams battled the remainder of the half. Kentucky carried a 1-point lead into the break after an 8-footer by Kenny Skywalker with 1 second left on the clock. LSU struck first out of the locker room to go ahead, 35-34. 4 lead changes and 3 ties later, the teams were an even 43-43 at the midway point of the second half. But Kentucky put together a small 4-0 run that caused Brown to call a timeout. In the huddle, he told his Tigers they were exactly where they needed to be. Brown told the media following the game, "I said this is exactly where we wanted them. I felt that if we could get them to the last 5 minutes, we could win it. This team is the smartest and most mentally tough, and by getting to the last 5 minutes, I felt we had our best chance." The players responded, tying the score at 47 just 1 minute later. Neither team seemed to grasp any definite advantage in the next final minutes of play until finally 2 free throws by Ricky Blanton with 2:31 to play put the Tigers up for good. Now the Tigers were still ahead 57-55 with 44 seconds to play. The Tigers went to the spread, expecting a quick Kentucky foul. Eddie Sutton, the Kentucky head coach, said after the game, "We wanted to see if our defense could get the ball. We wanted to go about 15 seconds and then foul. We waited a little too long." It was too long indeed, as with 17 seconds on the clock, Redden noticed an open Blanton underneath the basket, dished him the ball for an easy layup to give the Tigers a 59-55 advantage. Guard Roger Harden for the Kentucky Wildcats countered, driving the length of the floor and knocking down his shot to bring the Wildcats back within 2. But it was too little, too late. After Williams missed a free throw on the other end, James Blackman's shot from half court didn't fall, and the Tigers came away with a 59-57 victory. Redden earned the Southeast Regional MVP title for his efforts. He had 15 points and 8 rebounds against Kentucky following the stellar 27-point performance against the Yellow Jackets in the Sweet 16. John Williams scored 16. Anthony Wilson and Blanton each added 12, but more remarkable than Blanton's 12 points was the job he did defensively on Kentucky star Kenny Walker in the second half. Walker had an impressive 16 points to lead the Wildcats at the half, but Blanton and the Tigers came out in the second half ready to clamp down on defense. The 6'6 sophomore transformed from a guard to a center, held the Wildcats' big man to just 4 points in the final 20 minutes. Brown's so-called freak defense proved to be a success again, as the ever-changing style kept Kentucky always guessing and wore the opponents down mentally and physically throughout the night. Kentucky's frustration grew, as did LSU's confidence. The Tigers found ways to score on 8 of their last 10 possessions, and it seemed there was no way Kentucky could stop this team of destiny. The Tigers moved to 26-11 on the season, and they advanced to the Final Four at Dallas's Reunion Arena to face the West Regional champion Louisville Cardinals, which had defeated Auburn and Chuck Person 70-63 in its regional final. Unfortunately, the story ends here. Louisville played the first game of the afternoon at Dallas's Reunion Arena, and they were beaten 88-77 by the Louisville Cardinals. LSU actually led the game 44-36 at the half, But Louisville came out on fire, dominating the game, outscoring the Tigers 52-33 to score an 88-77 win. The Tigers were led by Don Redden's 22 points, John Williams with 14, Anthony Wilson's 15, Derek Taylor's 16. The Louisville Cardinals, of course, would go on to win the national championship by beating the Duke Blue Devils 2 nights later. Billy Thompson and Milt Wagner both scored 22 points, Purvis Ellison 11 points, Herb Crook 16, Jeff Hall 14, all 5 in double digits. Now, if you're an LSU fan, I think maybe this should be your favorite team of all time. This is a team that came from nowhere, that is an 11 seed, went farther than any 11 seed had ever gone before. They battled through adversity all season long. Probably Dale Brown's best coaching job. Dale did get them to the Final Four in 1981. And then in 1987, the very next year, they made it to the Elite Eight, where they lost on a last-second shot by the Indiana Hoosiers. So, today we talked about the 1986 LSU Tigers, one of my favorite teams to watch because they beat Kentucky. I'm from Indiana. I don't like Kentucky. But make sure you check out all of our episodes of Legends of March Madness as the next 3 or 4 weeks go on, because no legends can be created this year. And that's unfortunate. But we can still relive what we've seen in the past, and that can fill the void. Remember, you can follow me at Grilling Truth. You can hear us wherever you hear sports podcasts, including iHeartRadio, iTunes, TuneIn, Spreaker, Stitcher, you name it, we're there. But for now, this has been Mike Goodpaster. You've been listening to The Grueling Truth, where the legends speak.